What's going on, guys? This is the Club of the Man 1993 coming at you for another Retro WrestleMania review. We are now on WrestleMania 13. We are now 20 WrestleManias away from completing this series, so I've been trying to, knock these out of the ballpark the past couple days, so I'm hoping to do 13 now, and then I'll do 14 tonight. I might be going live with my Horseman Brothers tonight also. We'll see what happens, but I'm really starting to try and knuckle down and try to get these done. So we're getting into, the meat of these reviews, like some of the better ones as well. The first 9 or 10 or so weren't terrible, but except for WrestleMania 9, but they were just average. Now we're getting to the good stuff, like the big history as well in the WWF, leading to the WWE also eventually, which is I believe WrestleMania 18 was the first WrestleMania under the WWE and not the WWF. But before we start, of course, let's just go over some details from this WrestleMania. From the research I've done also, a lot happens between 1996 and 1997. As I mentioned a few times, this was around a time where the roster was kind of thin for the World Wrestling Federation because of the emergence of WCW. A lot of top stars were leaving the WWF to go to WCW. And also, this was around the time where ECW started to form as well. So it was even more competition for Vince McMahon, which that woke him up saying, okay, we got to do something about this now. This year, compared to how we've got from 1995 and 1996, the talent started to stack up, I'd say. The biggest story going into this WrestleMania had to do with the World Wrestling Federation Championship. So the title was originally held by Shawn Michaels, but around this time, he's saying this is where Shawn Michaels just was not really in the right state of mind in his life at this time. His drug issues and stuff were really catching up to him. And I think either this year, I think next year, because I think later on this year, that D-Generation X is formed with him, Triple H, and China. And then I think it was 1998 or 1999. One of those 2 years was when he went on his 4-year hiatus. Well, it was supposed to be his retirement, but it was a legitimate 4-year hiatus. He was gone from WWE until he came back in 2002. I think his first match back was against Triple H at SummerSlam, I believe. But around this time, he was not in the right state of mind. And I think the original plan was he was supposed to face Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13. So he did at WrestleMania 12 in the what's it called? Like the Iron Man match. It was just for the title. But at the time, him and HBK and the Hitman had massive heat on each other. They did not like each other, and it was all personal stuff. So HBK, years ago when he was the Intercontinental Champion, he refused to drop the title to the people that creative wanted to. So what happens? He just vacates the title and he does not wrestle on the show due to a knee injury. But the main reason that people describe it as he lost his smile. So he was not on he did not wrestle the show, but he was on commentary during the main event, just crapping on Bret Hart pretty much. This was also the year 1997. Well, of course, WrestleMania happened before this, but Bret Hart was on his way out and heading off to WCW. Now, Bret Hart was a babyface going into this WrestleMania. However, though, with his feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin, and around this time where Stone Cold Steve Austin was becoming the Stone Cold Steve Austin he ended up being, it was coming to a way where even though they were trying to get them to hate Austin, it was impossible to. And the match that happened, the submission match that happened on this show, turned fans against Bret Hart, and they were rooting for Stone Cold Steve Austin. That finish to that match, my goodness, we'll talk about that later. That, for being the first time watching the full match, that's that was just a moment right there, just showing how tough that SOB was. But this year that Hart was getting ready to leave for go to WCW, but like HBK, Bret Hart refused to drop the championship, as he was going to be dropping it to HBK. He refused to do so. So with this going crazy, and also this fear, because I believe Alundra Blaze left the WWF to go to WCW as Medusa. She betrayed the WWF with the Women's Championship, and they're afraid it doesn't happen again, pretty much. So Vince McMahon was doing anything to make sure that HBK got the title. That's when the Montreal Screwjob happened. Now the thing was though, is even though Bret Hart was supposed to be a heel, he was still loved whenever WWF was in Canada. And when we went to WCW, all that momentum from that Screwjob got carried over to there, and he was loved. Vince McMahon had the heat on him. That's when Vince McMahon started to really embrace his heel role. It took him off commentary, and he more so stuck to his role of just being, the owner of the company, which was trying to be held as a big secret for so long, but it was obvious after a while. People knew that Vince McMahon was the one in charge of the WWF. But this was at a time where Vince actually was trying to put on a good product. He felt the competition. And that's what the WWE does not have today, is competition. So they take things for granted. Wasn't the case about here. And this is also around the time where the Attitude Era began. Where saw these legends, Stone Cold, The Rock, Mankind, Triple H starts to really get into his groove. A few years we got Chris Jericho in there as well, and Chris Benoit. We can't really talk about Chris Benoit, but he still had, his great moments before before he murdered himself and his family. But we'll talk about that in a few years to come when we get to that triple threat match between him, Triple H, and HBK. But getting into WrestleMania 13, overall, what are my thoughts on the show? A lot of people say this is mainly a one-match show, which I can agree for the most part, but everything else wasn't too bad. There was a couple matches, though, that were below average or just underwhelming, and it was not because, it wasn't the wrestlers' fault. It was just the gimmicks weren't working for them, or, they just didn't have good chemistry together, which that's mainly what the main event entitled. The show took place on March 23rd, 1997 at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, Illinois, home of CM Punk. But the main storyline going into, though, even though I talk about the history, but the main storyline was that Bret Hart had originally won the vacated World Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Championship in a Four Corners elimination match at In Your House 13. However, he would lose the next day on Raw after Stone Cold Steve Austin, which I'll talk about more by their feud, interfered and cost him the match, and Psycho Sid won the title. And since the Undertaker, though, was the runner-up in the Four Corners elimination match, he was made the number one contender. However, there was going to be a rematch between Hart and Psycho Sid, and the winner would face the Undertaker at WrestleMania 13. It was inside of a steel cage. However, both Taker and Austin interfered in the match because Taker wanted to face Psycho Sid, and Austin wanted to make his match with the Hitman a title match, as they were going to be facing off in a submission match. We'll get more about their feud later, but Psycho Sid won the match, and that's why our main event was Psycho Sid against the Undertaker. Let's just get into the matches real quick. There's not too much to say about most of these matches. They're mostly just average to decent, as I said before. First, we had a 4-team tag team elimination match. It was the Godwins versus the Headbangers, Mosh and Thrasher versus Doug Furus and Phil Laughlin versus the New Blackjacks, which was Barry Windham and Bradshaw, or as we all know him today as JBL. It was an average tag match. It wasn't really anything too spectacular. The Headbangers won. That was pretty much it for that. That's what to say there. Moving on to the first WrestleMania for this guy. But however, it was not under the gimmick that made him successful and led to the success he is today. The World Wrestling Federation Intercontinental Championship. Rocky Maivia, or as we know as The Rock, taking on the Sultan, who will later be known as Rikishi, with the Iron Sheik. This, mainly The Rock especially. When he was Rocky Maivia, the gimmick was just awful. Like critics say, like he was hated so much. They tried to put him over as a babyface. It wasn't working. He got the Rocky sucks, die Rocky die, and this match was it was underwhelming. It wasn't really anything spectacular to write home about. Rock did win the match. I mean, we did have a moment afterwards where he got his father, Rocky Johnson, came out with him to celebrate. Also fend off, I think it was Vader who came in to try to take out Rocky. But, fought him off. And that was a cool moment for Rock and his dad. But the match itself, this was in the early days, and you see how successful The Rock went out to be. Just him being just The Rock, turning heel, which like a lot of babyface these days, no one can be just a purebred babyface and get over into WWE. You have to go heel before you actually, earn the respect, become a babyface. That's what's happening to Sami Zayn right now. Who knows? Maybe they'll do that to Bayley. Who knows? But that's what happened with this whole thing with Rocky Maivia. They did give, Rikishi eventually become Rikishi. Now he's a Hall of Famer, and now his sons, Jimmy and Jay, well, Jonathan, Fatu, and whatever the other one's name is, real life name is, they're just tearing it up now as the Usos, because it's not paranoia, it's the Usos! But yeah, below average match, not really one of Rock's best moments. We went on to a decent match. It was, well, at the time, he was still Hunter Hearst Helmsley, but Triple H still he had a different theme song this year than he did last year. He still was in that, like William Regal, Englishman gimmick that just seeing what Triple H ended up being, this just didn't really fit him, honestly. I just see him as just this badass going out there to kick some rear end, not this guy with like this English gimmick just walking around in a suit just like on a big stud. No Sable this year, though. This time, I didn't get to look at what happened with him and Sable. But this time, he had Chyna. And let me tell you something, I had seen some shots of Chyna when I first heard Chyna when she passed away a couple years ago. But my goodness, did she look, when she was in her younger days, she was big. Like if you wanted a bodyguard that was a woman, it was Chyna, no doubt about it. She was in Triple H's corner, which again would eventually lead to them later in the year forming D-Generation X. They're taking on Goldust with Marlena, Terry Runnels in Goldust's corner. The match was decent. I mean, even though this is probably Goldust at his best, but Triple H, not really. This is still in the early stage of his career. He's getting the green war off him. He still had the heat from that curtain call thing that I talked about in WrestleMania 12 with how, it was a tag match. It involved, I can't remember who's all whose team, but it was Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Shawn Michaels, the Clique. Right before Scott Hall and Nash, it was the last match before they were going off to WCW. Even though it was two of them were face, two of them were heels. After the match, it was outside a steel cage also. They, shared a moment in the ring together, breaking character, and Triple H was the one who got massive heat over that. So I think Triple H was still at the time dealing with that aftermath, but, we all know what he would go on to become eventually the game, the Cerebral Assassin, D-Generation X. This match with Goldust was decent. I mean, it was, again, Goldust at his best, but Triple H not really at his best, so it was good for what it was. The match ended, though, with Terry Runnels getting knocked into Chyna, who ragdolled her, holding on to her, having Triple H hit the pedigree on Goldust for the victory. So Triple H, after being just squashed by the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 12, gets his first WrestleMania victory with the victory over Goldust. But hopefully we'll see better from Triple H, because that gimmick, I'm sorry, just seeing it, just like, geez, that's what he once was? That sucked. We then had the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championship. It was British Bulldog and Owen Hart taking on a team of Mankind and Vader with Paul Bearer. Paul Bearer was no longer the manager for the Undertaker. He was now with Vader, and I think I heard was this the year Kane first debut? I can't remember, but he does become the manager for somebody else later on this year from the research I've heard also. Match was decent. I mean, it actually wasn't too bad, but the thing that just kind of took me out of it for this match was the finish. It ends in a double countout. Again, why double countouts at WrestleMania? WrestleMania should be like the culmination of these big stories, and we're getting double counts, have the feud to continue. Not a big fan of it. Besides that, again, the match wasn't too bad, but just that finish kind of took me out of the element a little bit. That's why this match was more so decent rather than just solid. This was the match of the night. WrestleMania 13, as I said, is mainly a one-match show. Most of the stuff is still, decent, but nothing like, you would want to watch more than once. But if there was one reason why to watch WrestleMania 13 again, it's this match. The no disqualification submission match. The special guest referee, Ken Shamrock, Bret the Hitman Hart, taking on Stone Cold Steve Austin. This was a match that had one of the most famous double turns in history, and it's what made Stone Cold Steve Austin Stone Cold Steve Austin, not just Mr. Ringmaster anymore, however like he was the year before when he was with Ted DiBiase. So we kind of read a little bit at the beginning of how Austin was costing Hart the championship or wanted to face him in a title match for this, but earlier. But like, how did this feud start? Well, Austin did win King of the Ring in 1996, and he also began taunting Bret Hart, who was not active at the time. He would return and accepted a match from Stone Cold at Survivor Series. Hart won the match, but their feud continued, and at the Royal Rumble, this was the famous moment wherever Bret Hart should have won the Royal Rumble. However, though, due to a brawl between Terry Funk and Mankind outside the ring, the referees were distracted and nobody saw Stone Cold get eliminated. So he got back in the ring and he took out Hart, making him like he was the winner. But then the controversy started up. That's when the Four Corners match started up. And then since Undertaker was the runner-up, as I said before, he was made the number one contender for the title. Whoever won between Psycho Sid and the Hitman. But of course, they had the tension go back between them. And as I said before, at this time, Stone Cold Steve Austin was so entertaining that you're trying to make people hate him, he was loved. Nobody could root against him. I mean, the match started, with Bret Hart as the face. This was a classic, though. These were two guys that, the story was built so good, had so much heat with each other. They were beating the crap out of each other with, weapons and such. Just trying, and they used the ring post to try to get people to tap out. And then, of course, the best moment of all, people always talk about this, that ending with Stone Cold gushing in blood on his face. The Hitman had him in the sharpshooter, and Stone Cold and Jim Ross, who was back on commentary this year. I think it was the last also that Vince McMahon was on commentary as well. It was them two and Jerry the King Lawler. He called it well. Stone Cold never gave up. The never say die attitude. He never tapped out or anything, but he passed out. He passed out, and that's how Bret Hart won. But afterwards, people again just could not help but cheer for Stone Cold Steve Austin. So screw it, we're turning him face, and pretty much turned the Hitman heel, who afterwards he started to attack Stone Cold Steve Austin. So that's why this is probably one of the best WrestleMania matches of all time. It's a shame, though, because this was a year where I think again a match against Owen Hart, Stone Cold suffered a severe neck injury that kind of limited him over his career and probably, cut his career a little bit short. However, though, he was still able to do what he can do, but people still these days wonder, if Stone Cold was not limited due to that neck injury, he probably could have been even a bigger star than he was. And with how big he was, you couldn't imagine how much even bigger he could have gotten. But this match was just amazing. The story being told, that ending with the blood, and just Hart having Austin pass out to the finisher, which is unreal, one of the best double turns in history. And this was also what opened the door to the Attitude Era. Stone Cold Steve Austin became the man, the top babyface in the company after what happened during this match. We didn't have a solid 6-man tag match. It was a Chicago street fight. It was the Nation of Domination, Farouk, Crush, and Savio Vega taking on Hawk, Animal, and Ahmed Johnson, who I believe were also known as Legions of Doom. Hawk, Animal, and Johnson won. It was a really solid tag match. There was a story behind it, I can't remember exactly, but it was a fun tag match. I think this was the first street fight we had, because there was a lot more gimmick matches that seemed to be introduced in these WrestleManias, but it was a solid match. I enjoyed it for what it was. And then we had WrestleMania Streak match number 6, the main event. It was a no disqualification match for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. Psycho Sid taking on The Undertaker. Now, I said before when I started this review, there was a couple matches that weren't really that good, but mainly was because a lot of these good names were upcoming stars, but they were still green and their gimmicks weren't working out. This was not The Undertaker's fault or Psycho Sid's fault. Actually, if anything, I've heard rumors that Psycho Sid this time was over more and performing better than Shawn Michaels, who was out on commentary, by the way. And at the beginning of the match, Bret Hart came out and he was pretty much, just dissing on him, saying how he should be in this match and whatnot. And HBK was just, just trashing on Bret Hart as well. Hart came out again later in the match also to try to interfere, but, it didn't work out as there was a finish to this match. But, it was just leading to, the tension between Hart and the WWE and the WWF, and leading him to his exit to go to WCW, which they screwed him over big time there. But, I'm sorry. All respect. Psycho Sid, I'm sure if I knew him better, I would accept him more. but Undertaker as well. I thought Undertaker looked better in this match. He has gotten better, but him and Psycho Sid just didn't blend well together. This match wasn't really that great. It was, I'd say like maybe a little below average. I wouldn't say it was underwhelming, but it was just a little below average. It's like it was just boring. Nothing really happened. Taker had some good moments. Psycho Sid did, but this match was not really one of the strongest main events I'd seen. Taker wins though. He had a great moment afterwards. I believe this was his first World Wrestling Federation Championship. You know, he was an upcoming star as well. You know, glad for him. Again, it wasn't his worst match. His worst match by far is definitely with Giant Gonzalez. But, you know, again, these two just didn't really blend well together. It wasn't their fault. Same like earlier with, you know, Rikishi and The Rock when they had these terrible gimmicks. You know, they did the best they could with it, but it just wasn't working out. But we do see better to come for all of these superstars as well. Well, I'm not sure about Psycho Sid, but definitely, you know, Undertaker, The Rock, Rikishi. Let's see what happens then. I gotta do a little bit of a Rock imitation though. I did it for The Rock. I did it for the people. I did. Oh, shut up, you! Whatever, wearing fatty or whatever the heck The Rock said. Just try to do that imitation real quick. But that is it for WrestleMania 13. Again, it was mainly a one-match show, but most of your matches were at least acceptable. The exception maybe two. The Intercontinental title match and the main event were a little below average, a little underwhelming. Again, it was just, you know, just gimmicks that just weren't working out for people. Or just like Taker and Psycho Sid, they just didn't mesh well together. If I had to give it a grade though, I would still give it a B-. A really low B-, I'd say. Not quite C+, but I enjoyed it a little bit more than just, you know, a decent show. I thought this was, you know, decent to solid in between. So I'm going to give it a B- for WrestleMania 13. What are your thoughts on WrestleMania 13? Please leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And as always, click that like and subscribe for more content on this channel. Follow me on Twitter at TheManAirboy93. And again, I'll be watching WrestleMania 14 next. Hopefully doing that review before the end of the day. And I may be going live tonight with my Horseman brothers as well to talk some NXT call-ups. If not, then I'll see you guys in my next video. Till then, guys, have a great day.